Welcome to the Enneagram with Chelsea and Nicole. This is a positively deviant culture podcast anchored in the Enneagram. In this conversation, we're continuing on in the exploration of the type 7, and we're talking about their movement points. So what happens for them in times of stress and flourishing. Before we get too far into it, we have a quick reminder.
Every episode, I want to remind listeners that this isn't a prescriptive fixed tool and that our conversations are designed to work with the material and the ideas in an exploratory way. So as long as I've been working with the Enneagram, my knowledge and application continues to evolve. And that's what we're here to do, to keep learning.
The reason we talk about the movements is because we really want to fill out the picture of the personality of the 7. And so the words of integration and disintegration points describe what's happening for a type 7 in stress. They disintegrate to type 1. And in flourishing, they integrate to type 5. But the way that you teach it is a more comprehensive, a more advanced way of thinking about it, where the 7 can take on negative attributes of both 1 and 5 in times of stress. That 7s go to the best, the high side of both 1 and 5 when they're just absolutely nailing it.
Exactly as you said, Chelsea, it creates a more comprehensive picture. And even though it is a little bit more advanced and a little bit more complicated, it's more whole. And I think that as we experience these two types, in addition to the core type, it really fills out our experience of what it means to be a 7.
It also, for the 7 or those around 7s, gives them insights into what could be happening in a time of stress. If all of a sudden this personality sort of transforms and looks really different than when it's in homeostasis, I like to call it, that kind of centered, grounded middle space, or the possibilities for this type to really grow in to other types and take on the very best attributes, and where those are likely to start occurring, even though the goal is to get, integrated into all 9 types. Before we actually launch into the very best and worst attributes of the type 1 and the type 5, if we can go back and talk about the core drives and fears for the type 7 as an extension of our core brilliance conversation. And then as we think about those core drives and fears, understand really what's propelling them to move into these other places that we know oftentimes they're self-protection strategies, or they could be growth strategies.
Yes, the core drive and core fear are essential to each type, as well as the core brilliance. Those are the 3 elements that really make up your core type. And so the core fear of type 7 is being trapped in pain and not being able to get out of painful experiences and suffering. And then the core drive is the opposite, right? Which is the drive to experience joy and freedom, which is the absence of pain and the opposite of being trapped. And which ultimately for 7s equals fulfillment and satisfaction, right? When you have joy and freedom.
I always like to remind people who are listening, especially if this is like the early, episodes and they're just getting to know us and the body of work that you've been, connected to over such a long period of time, that there's an intentionality around the polarized and extreme words and characteristics that you use. And it's on purpose in order to give people a summary or a sampling of what it could look like. But these actual movement points happen in varying degrees.
Yeah, they're absolutely just surface and very short and not thorough expressions of each type to give just an initial greater picture. So the worst of type 1 is that ones are rigid, inflexible, controlling, tend to be patronizing. They find everything that's wrong, so highly critical, very judgmental. They tend to be resentful and hold grudges. And they also are incredibly, at their worst, this is all their worst, guys. At their worst, they tend to be pretty self-punishing, punishing of others. Ones at their worst tend to make everything moral issues. they will substitute correctness and rightness and their idea of morality in the place of being a human being. So it's after that kind of deeply dark, negative expression and summary of the worst of a one, the best of the one, and where this comes from is ones teach us about nobility, about integrity, that there is a right and good way, that everything can be made better. They are the reformers. They're the ones who can build something better than what currently exists. They can understand an ideal and achieve that ideal. They teach us about how to self-correct, how to self-improve, how to be committed to growth and to making the world a better place, how to notice the problems in the world and then how to solve them. They are excellent at thinking architecturally and understanding the process of growth and development and improvement. They can see what isn't working and they understand how to fix it. So the best of a one is amazing, where they teach us integrity and they teach us how to live in a way that is responsible to ourselves and to others and to the planet.
It's amazing when you started with rigidity on the low side of one. So like a 7 can, in a stress response, become really rigid because it's the complete opposite of kind of this freedom and limitless expansion that you would normally see a 7's operating out of. But then when you go to the high side in terms of like growth or integration, when a 7's taking on the 1, they have the energy and the exploration to turn over every stone and understand what are those problems. And then through invitation, lead people in an energetic and positive and optimistic way into reform and all this regeneration to bring to life what's needed to make things better.
That's right. 7's, when they're going to the low side of a 1, will end up being very critical, judgmental, restricted. They'll be strict and controlling, angry even. The high side of a 1 that when 7's move to, that actually gives them the discipline in order to execute on their imagination and their curiosity and to engage the unknown, which requires an enormous amount of skills, right? That 7's need a lot of discipline and structure and logic and being reasonable, which is a high side of a 1, is 1's have this feeling of sit, let's reason together. And there's an invitations that 1 provide to be super reasonable in our expectations of others and our expectations of the world, in the standards that we have. And at the 1's low side, they're incredibly unreasonable and will set people up to fail and will always be failing themselves. So these are incredibly interesting and significant movements, right? For 7's to take on the worst and the best. It's easy to see when we're giving this full picture how the high side of a 1 really not only informs, but serves the brilliances of a 7, the discipline, the integrity, the sobriety. It's also an incredibly important piece of what 1's teach us is to be sober, to be to take things seriously and to consider thoroughly and thoughtfully and to be responsible. So you have that combined with the 7's playfulness and the 7's levity. That creates a beautiful balance and very important skills and shapes that are required for 7's to enter into new places that most can't go or don't know how to navigate.
As always, so complimentary and not a nice to have, like absolutely essential to be able to move into these other places to complete the life task of being a 7 and bringing joy and freedom with a pragmatic approach so that it can be bridled, like a sense of, I think sober joy is a really, really great, we're going to kind of get to that in the paradox, but that's the balance that's necessary for it to be real, for it to actually become a part of the reality to not just a 7, but to the people around them.
And that's why we take the time to expose these points of movement, because they really are a picture of how sevens can be in different moments and how we pop in and out of good and bad or better and worse. We move around, and these primary points of movement are really important to understand in ourselves and in each other.
Now let's talk about the way that sevens move to 5.
The worst of a 5 is to withdraw and to be disinterested in humanity and in the world. So it's not only that 5s at their worst are avoiding humanity and the world, but humanity in particular, but they actually kind of hate humanity. And because of that, at their worst, they will avoid and contract and constrict themselves and kill their own humanity so that they will just become machines or computers living in a human body. And all that comes with that is a really great encapsulation of the worst of a 5, where there's arrogance, dismissiveness, and a cutting off of their own humanity in a way that makes them very machine-like, so that they no longer have any fascination or curiosity with humans in the world. And that turns to hate in a way that causes them to create a whole other world, that they will exist in the void and in death in ways that are not generative and are not full of wisdom and knowledge and truth. They end up being isolated and only dark. That 5s just sit there in a judgmental, anxious, separate, withdrawn, angry place, and they use their knowledge against humanity. That's the worst of a 5. And the best of a 5 is this place of omniscience, this place of we can know, we can enter the matrix and we can enter the realities of the universes, and we can comprehend that there is the ability to understand and to know certain things. 5s are the ones that open the veil for the rest of us, so that which is hidden can now be seen. And they're able to engage in ways that are complex and with depth and breadth. And they're able to metabolize all kinds of information and process information with such thoroughness and with such accuracy and credibility that it can build new things. 5s are the inventors and the ultimate scientists. They show us places and things that we don't understand and we don't know, and that also are incredibly useful for humanity, and that help humanity evolve and grow and expand.
The knowledge that sits within the type 5 also sounds absolutely essential as a piece of the exploration puzzle that 7s are fulfilling in the world.
Yes, it's the same thing, that when 7s take on the worst of a 5, when they're disintegrated, it's nihilistic. They become nothing means anything, and there's nobody matters, nothing matters, nothing matters. And so 7s will use that energy to be more self-destructive and destructive in the world, and more only hedonistic and only self-medicating and actually addictive. And this is what's so interesting, is both the low side and the high side amplify the best and the worst of our core types. So the low side of a 5 amplifies the low side of a 7. And conversely, the high side of a 5 amplifies the high side of a 7. And this is how it is for all of us, right? Is this amplification in both our low side and our high sides. So the high side of a 5 actually also gives a certain credibility and precision. And by the way, this is really interesting. Both 5s and 1s are gifted with precision and accuracy and detail. And what's interesting is that 7s left to their own devices are very incomplete. They will struggle with commitment, both in what they produce and accomplish in terms of their projects and also in their relationships. 7s are very quick to move on, and they're quick learners. They learn very quickly, which is a good thing, but they don't necessarily create depth. So 5 brings the depth and the breadth. And both 5 and 1, the high side of both 5 and 1, bring precision and accuracy and a credibility to what 7s are doing that make it very, very powerful.
Sounds like a groundedness that is absolutely necessary for sort of the wind that I picture happening for a 7.
That's an excellent point. And Chelsea, I would use the word anchor, right? That 7s can have so much levity and movement that 7s actually are metaphorically fly. They fly. They're flyers. And both 1 and 5 in the high side, in the best, really anchor 7's movement that give it gravity. And so you have levity and gravity combined is what actually creates powerful things in the world and for humans. So yes, I love that point that 5 and 1 bring an anchoring. 5s bring an anchoring of knowledge and information and credibility, and 1s bring an anchoring of person, that there's an integrity, that we are responsible to one another. 7s left to their own devices are only responsible to themselves and are very much the lone wolf, but they're also not as independent as they seem. They need others to live in happiness and fulfillment. So they're not quite as independent as a 5. 7s have a rub where they like people, they need people in terms of an emotional way, but they'll live very independently as if they don't. And a lot of what they're up to, they can do by themselves, but they still have a need for relationship in a particular way. And so the high side of a 1 grounds 7s in their relationship to others, that there's an integrity in a mutual service, that it's not just about the self and meeting the needs of yourself, which 7s tend to do. It's about engaging reciprocity, and it's about giving and taking. And 7s at their best do enjoy heroing others, right? So this is the other thing, is that 1s also enjoy this when they're going to their 7th self. They like to fly in and make everything better because they love to reduce the suffering of others. And so they enjoy being able to provide goodness and to relieve other people's pain, but then they don't necessarily stick around very long to do some of the difficult inner work. And we'll talk about more about this in the paradox section.
We also talk about different centers of intelligence. And so there's sort of the heart center of intelligence for the 2, 3, and 4. There's the center of intelligence in the mind for the 5, 6, and 7. And then there's an instinctual sort of body or gut intelligence that's in the 8, 9, and 1. So when 7s go to 1, how does the instinctual intelligence add complexity to their mind-centered kind of natural centers of intelligence?
When 7s move to 1, they absolutely get this instinctual quality of a 1, because 1s, as you just said, are in the body in an instinctual set. And 7s can be flighty in this way and need that kind of body centeredness. 7s can be ungrounded, spontaneous, not committed to precision or accuracy. They're committed to speed and resiliency and change. So what 5s and 1 provide is patience, slowing down and having accuracy and precision. 7s at their worst are incredibly impatient, but both 5s and 1s are very patient and diligent and thorough. So this combination is really important for 7s to take on the best of both 1 and 5. And these movement points are clearly a huge advantage for them in achieving their jobs in the world.
So to continue on with the conversation on the 7, next we're going to talk about the paradoxes. Thank you for listening. If you're interested in working with us, you can find the link to our LinkedIn in our show notes. And we would love if you subscribe and follow us so you can get updates about future episodes.